Hey everyone, this is Eric Bond, the founder of Beat the GMAT, and welcome to today's webinar. It's called How to Write Effective Application Essays, a Step-by-Step Guide. And this is a very appropriate theme for this time of year, as many of you are wrapping up your round one application essay questions and looking forward to your round two. And I'm excited because we have a fantastic expert here to help us out with this exact topic. It's Marc Zawel, who is the founder of AcceptU. So a little bit about AcceptU, if you guys haven't heard of it before. Check out AcceptU.com after this session. It's a unique firm because this admissions firm connects college and MBA applicants with former admissions officers at these schools that they're interested in attending. And they have a one-on-one virtual counseling strategy and an approach that's very effective in getting applicants just like yourself into their dream schools. Marc is someone who is intimately knowledgeable about the admissions process, having gotten into Cornell for his and attended Cornell for his bachelor's and received an MBA from the University of North Carolina Kenan-Flagler School of Business. Obviously someone who has been able to navigate the admissions process successfully himself, but not only that, he has also chaired the Admissions Advisory Board, evaluated application essays, and conducted alumni interviews for Cornell since 2004. And now he is currently serving as the founder of AcceptU. So in this session today, Marc is going to walk us through his presentation that breaks down the key steps in effectively writing application essays so you can present your best side to business schools. And in a moment when I hand it off to Marc, he'll go through his presentation, but we will reserve some time at the end for Q&A. So if you have a question about anything that you see in this presentation or would like to pose a question about writing effective application essay responses to Marc, you can write your question in as a chat. There's a little chat window on the right-hand side of this GoToWebinar panel. And feel free to write your question in at any time during this presentation. Our team will be reviewing questions as they come in. And when we get to the Q&A, we will be posing those questions to Marc to answer live. So I think with that, we're ready to get started. So Marc, thank you so much for joining us today for this presentation.
Thanks for having me, Eric. Thank you all for being here today. I'll start just by saying that you can download a copy of this presentation by following that link at the bottom of the screen, learnmore.acceptu.com/essay. If it's easy to follow along that way, or if you have to talk out before we've wrapped up, you can download a PDF of this presentation. But Eric, thanks for the introduction. Just to follow up on that, I'll reiterate that AcceptU is an MBA admissions counseling group. We're comprised entirely of former admissions officers from top 25 MBA programs. And our counselors provide one-on-one virtual support, so by phone, Skype, and email, that has given hundreds of applicants, we feel, a competitive advantage in this highly competitive process and placed them into the business schools of their choice. Eric has given some background on myself. I want to also introduce my co-founder, Stephen Friedfeld. Stephen has over 10 years of admissions experience, both undergrad as well as graduate at Princeton as well as at Cornell University. And all of our counselors have MBA admissions experience from highly selective top 25 programs. And you see some of our counselors there as well as the schools that they have admissions experience at. So today we're going to be talking about a timely topic and also a really important topic in the MBA admissions process, and that is the application essay or application essays. We're going to cover 5 topics today. First, we're going to talk about just an overview of MBA admissions essays. I want you to understand why they are important, as well as what you can expect. I know that some of you are in the midst of the application process. Some of you are perhaps planning ahead to next year or subsequent years. So and you'll have to excuse the occasional siren, but we're located here in Boston as we're, I think, cleaning up from yesterday's hurricane still. The next topic I'd like to cover is getting organized, and that's really the first step of tackling these application essays. The second step is what we call self-discovery, and this is about helping you understand why you're interested in MBA and what makes you different. And this is a really critical step to the MBA essay writing process, and I want to spend a fair amount of time talking about why. The third step is putting pen to paper, or more likely beginning to type up your essays. I want to give you some tips and pointers on how to engage your reader, which will be an admissions officer, how to keep it brief and to the point, and how to put together a compelling essay that will ultimately help you stand out in this process. And then finally, we went out to our team of former MBA admissions officers, and we asked them for some tips and pointers on how applicants can, again, differentiate themselves, and we'll wrap up with those tips based on their experience, having reviewed literally thousands of these essays. So let's start with an overview of these MBA admissions essays, why they're important, and what you can expect.
Hey Mark, this is Eric. Sorry to interrupt, but we did receive a request from a member about having you speak up a little bit more loudly.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me, I'll try to do that. So why are application essays important? Application essays are important, we feel, for 6 reasons. The first is that admissions officers want to learn more about you and your background. I know that this sounds obvious, but you have to think about the essay in relation to the other pieces of your application. And it's really only in the essay, as well as in, say, your letters of recommendation, as well as your resume, that you can present a strong case beyond just your academic qualifications as to why you feel that you are qualified to attend that particular program. Second, some MBA programs no longer have on-campus or off-campus interviews. So they really rely on these essays as a means of better understanding applicants. Third, the essay gives a voice to your application. You have to think about admissions officers that are sitting in front of a computer or at their desk reviewing literally hundreds of applications. And they're looking at academic qualifications, they're looking at your undergraduate GPA, they're looking at your GMAT score, but they really want to look beyond that. They want to know, who is this applicant and why is this applicant the right fit for our program? And the essay is going to give your application a voice. And that voice is something that these admissions officers can connect with. And being able to connect with an admissions officer that is reviewing your application can really give you an advantage in this process when they're trying to weed through thousands of applicants that seem similarly qualified to attend that school. Strong writing and strong essays also show thoughtfulness, an ability to properly analyze certain situations, and also strongly communicate. And communication skills are something that business schools are looking to identify in applicants. So much of business revolves around an ability to communicate well. These application essays are your opportunity to show your ability to communicate well at this stage. Fifth, admissions to these programs, these top 25 programs, as you know, is highly competitive. Most applicants are qualified to attend these schools. The applicant pool is actually self-selecting in many respects. You don't typically apply to these programs unless you think that you have the academic qualifications to get admitted. Now, there's a big difference between being academically qualified and actually getting admitted. You have to be academically qualified in order to make that initial cut. But after they've made that initial cut of those applicants that are academically qualified, the way that you can stand out among that large applicant pool is through thoughtful essays, through a strong resume, through your letters of recommendation, through an interview. That's how you move from being qualified to being admitted to these programs. Finally, the essays can help you address weaknesses or deficiencies in your application. They can help you explain extenuating circumstances. you need to own your story. And by own your story, I mean if you don't explain your story and you don't tell your story in the way that you want to tell your story, admissions officers will draw their own conclusions. And those conclusions might not necessarily be accurate, but they are conclusions that will be drawn given the information that you are providing the admissions office. So if you have deficiencies, if you have weaknesses, think about explaining those in an optional essay. You don't want to make excuses in the optional essay, but if you don't explain those weaknesses or deficiencies in an optional essay, admissions officers will draw their own conclusions, and those conclusions might not be accurate, and those conclusions might not help you in this process. What can you expect with the essays? Those of you that are in the midst of the application process probably are well aware of this. Those of you that are looking ahead, I think this will be helpful for you to have an understanding of what's in front of you. Most business schools today require 2 to 6 application essays. The essays can range in length. There are schools that are asking for a 140-character tweet as an essay, and there are schools that are requesting 1,000+ word essays on why you want to attend, or an example of leadership, or a time that you overcame a real challenge. So there's a real, from 140 characters to over 1,000 words, you're talking about a real range in the length of each of these essays. The essays can cover a variety of topics. Most often, they're centered around why you're interested in an MBA, why you feel the program is a good fit, and what you can bring to the school. And over the course of this presentation today, I'm going to keep returning to this. You're interested in an MBA, the fit of the school, and what you can bring to the table. Because it's really these 3 pieces that will help you put together a much more compelling application essay. I also want you to keep in mind that essays are very time-consuming. Many applicants and even clients of AcceptU think that they can just sit down and write a draft of these in an hour or so, and that's really just not the case, and that should not be the approach that you take. It's likely that you haven't written a personal essay like this in some time, and essays are not just about a polished piece of writing. You need to think that admissions officers are gauging your ability to pick appropriate questions and topics. In the same way that admissions officers are gauging your ability to identify appropriate individuals to write your letters of recommendation, the same can be true for the essays. Now, the last point I want to make with respect to the essays and what you can expect with them is you need to start writing as far in advance of the deadlines as possible. You might have a timeline for how long you anticipate these essays taking. It will likely take more time than you expect. So get a jump on them and start this process as soon as possible. We've talked about an overview of the admissions essays. Now I want to talk about the first step, which is getting organized and figuring out your best means of tackling these essays. So, as I mentioned before, you don't want to just sit down and start writing your essays. I think that this is a mistake that many applicants, including some of our clients, make. What you really want to do first is determine how many essays you will be writing. Figure out the application deadlines that you're going to have to be submitting by, as well as the respective essay questions for each of the programs that you intend on applying to. After you have determined how many essays, what the essay questions are, and what the school deadlines are, try to broadly arrange arrange essays based on the topic. Look more broadly. You're going to see across various top 25 programs that there are questions about leadership. They're going to be posed in different ways, but the core question is going to be about leadership, or the core question is going to be about challenges, either personal or professional. Or the core question might be about why you want to pursue an MBA. This, I think, categorization of the topics will just give you some sense of what's in front of you. It's not as easy, though, as writing an essay for each topic and using it across multiple schools. And I think that, again, this is a mistake that many applicants fall into, is categorizing topics and then saying, well, 4 out of the 6 schools that I'm applying to ask about leadership. So I'm going to write one leadership essay, and then I'm going to use that essay across multiple schools. I think that that's a big mistake and trap to fall into, and I would strongly discourage you against taking this approach. You can definitely reuse content across essays for multiple schools, but it really should not be your approach to simply replicate essays when you see similar questions across the various schools. And the reason why is that you want to work on your essays on a school-by-school basis. You need to think about these essays not just as standalone essays. You need to think about a portfolio of essays. Now, if a school is asking you to write 2 or 3 or 4 essays, you need to think about all of those essays together in sum. What are those essays telling admissions officers about you? You also need to think about how these essays are highlighting different qualities or experiences that you've had that perhaps are not being highlighted in other parts of your application. For example, in your letters of recommendation, in your resume, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a few slides about what exactly you should be discussing in terms of examples in these essays. There are advantages of starting with essays for your top choice school. It's when you're going to be freshest. It's when you're going to not feel like this is your 80th essay that you've written for business school. But there's also some disadvantages to that because you haven't really written any essays yet. So you could also make a case for starting with, say, your lowest choice school and trying to hone your writing skills and hone your responses so that when you do approach your top choice school, you feel very comfortable writing these types of essays. Or you can simply start with a school whose deadline is closest to where you are today. Here's some logistics on approaching the essay. You want to follow a methodical approach to essay writing. Choose appropriate questions to answer. You want to answer, this goes for, of course, those schools that give you a choice. You want to answer those questions that play up your strengths and give admissions officers a more complete picture of who you are and why you are different. You do not want to choose questions simply because you have already written a similar essay. And I know it's very tempting when you have to write as many essays as you have to write for this process simply to say, well, I've already written an essay that's quite similar to this. I might as well just use that one. You don't want to force a topic or story or an example to a question that really doesn't fit because it does raise a red flag among admissions officers, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a few slides. Put together a timeline for yourself and stick to it. As I mentioned earlier, writing essays can be an extremely time-intensive process. Think about how long you studied for the GMAT. And I want to make a strong case today that the essays are more important than your GMAT score if your GMAT score hits a certain target. Meaning if your academic qualifications, meaning your undergraduate GPA as well as your GMAT score, pass a certain hurdle, it really is going to be your essay or your essays that determine whether you are admitted to these schools. And that's why I want to make a case as to why you should commit serious time, as much time perhaps as you, maybe not as much time as you perhaps committed to studying for the GMAT, but serious commitment in terms of time to these essays. You want to establish realistic deadlines and hold yourself accountable, or have a girlfriend or a wife or your mom or a close friend do so. And you also want to set aside dedicated time to write. I know that working professionals are busy, that applying to business school is not your full-time job, but sitting down for 20 minutes during lunch, I don't think is an appropriate way to approach these essays. You want to set aside dedicated time, and you want to allow yourself to really reflect during this essay writing process. We've talked about more generally MBA admissions essays. We've talked about getting organized and figuring out how to tackle the essays. Now I want to talk about our second step, which is really this self-discovery and why you're interested in MBA and what makes you different. Before you begin writing these essays, consider some questions. Why do I want to pursue an MBA? Why is this program the right fit for me? How will I be able to contribute in a way that other applicants won't? For that third question, that's a real critical question, because now think about you and your application in relation to the thousands of other applicants that are similarly qualified and looking to gain entry to these highly selective business schools. The way that admissions officers are going to be making these decisions is by looking at your specific contribution, why you are different, how you are different, and how that will allow you to contribute in ways that other applicants can't. When you look at what makes you different, consider your professional experience, consider your personal interests, consider your future career interests, consider the diversity of your background. What I generally recommend and what our counselors generally recommend is that you come up with a list of 3 to 5 key differentiators. And these differentiators will form the foundation of your application essays. Your differentiators, as I mentioned, they can be personal, they can be professional. Your differentiator may be that you have exemplary leadership experience. You can have very strong communication skills. You can bring geographic diversity. Perhaps you are living in a part of the world that sees an underrepresentation of applicants to these business schools. Perhaps you could bring ethnic or socioeconomic or other diversity to the table. Maybe you have really unique past work experience. Maybe your future career interests are not very common. Get feedback from others in terms of what makes you different. If you can't figure it out yourself, consider those that have known you for a longer period of time. You can even look back at old performance reviews or professional evaluations and try to pick up on those types of qualities, those types of characteristics that make you a little bit different than others. You don't want to ask your parents, you don't want to ask your boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife. You want to find unbiased sources. I'm sure that your parents or your significant other will have great things to say about you, but we really need to look at unbiased sources that can give you some more practical feedback in terms of what makes you different. So now you know what makes you different. Now let's figure out what business schools are looking for in applicants. Now, what I would suggest that you do is dig deeper into each of the business schools that are on your radar and try to get a sense of whether there are specific values or characteristics that they are looking to identify in applicants. Some MBA programs are very upfront with the criteria. UNC Chapel Hill, my alma mater, if you go onto their website, they actually list the criteria that is most important in the review process. So they say that leadership and organizational abilities, communication skills, interpersonal skills, teamwork, a record of delivering results, your drive, motivation, your analytical skills, your prior academic performance, and your career progression. These are the criteria that are most important to them. And if those criteria are most important to them, this is going to be helpful in building essays that meet these types of criteria. Other schools are going to be less upfront about what particular criteria are most important, in which case we would recommend more research. You should talk to students, you should talk to alumni, you should talk to professors, you should talk to admissions officers and get a sense of what are the criteria that are most important when you are making admissions decisions or when you are looking to identify applicants that are a good fit for the school. So now you know your strengths and differentiators. You know what business schools are looking for. And I feel like at this stage, you're on a right track to writing a compelling essay. But before you begin starting your essays and sitting down, you have to keep one last thing in mind. And that's you cannot write what you think admissions officers want you to write. This comes across, I think, as ungenuine and inauthentic. These essays are your opportunity to be real, to be someone. This is really the role of the essay. The admissions officers at these schools have data points on you, but you need to become someone who is likable, someone who these admissions officers would want to interact with, and someone who would actively contribute to their campus community. Now that we've covered the self-discovery piece, I want to get to the final step, which is actually getting these essays written. What we've done here is we've put together 6 pointers on what to keep in mind as you begin to write these essays. The first is to follow instructions. You want to always answer the question. You want to be direct. You want to be to the point. You want to be engaging in your writing. We would say that creativity is rewarded, but only to a certain extent. You want to rely on examples to showcase who you are. You want to proofread, iterate, and polish your essays. Now let's dig into each of these 6 pointers. So the first, follow instructions. We get a lot of questions here at AcceptU about the length of essays. It's actually a lot simpler than applicants think it is. If an essay prompts you to write, if a prompt asks you to write an essay that is 500 words, you should write an essay that's 500 words. It doesn't need to be exactly 500 words. Generally, we say plus or minus 10% is fine, but follow the instructions that are being provided to you. If you can't follow those instructions, I think that admissions officers are saying, why can't this applicant follow simple instructions? You also want to answer the entire question. And this, again, it sounds obvious, but it's so surprising how many applicants fail to actually answer the essay question. Write the question at the top of your prompt. This will not just remind you while you're writing of what question you are looking to answer, but it'll actually remind admissions officers. And admissions officers are sitting there reviewing thousands of essays, and sometimes as an admissions officer, you almost forget what question this applicant is responding to. So put the question at the top. If there are 2 or more parts to the question, make sure that you answer them all, and make sure that you dedicate ample time between the 2 parts of the question. Don't spend 75% of your essay answering the first question and 25% answering the second question. Provide admissions officers with equal writing for each of those questions. And then don't try to tailor another essay to a question that doesn't fit. As I mentioned earlier, reusing examples is fine. If you have a good leadership example, if you have a really good challenge example that you've used in other essays, you're more than welcome to use those examples in other essays. But you don't want to reuse an entire essay. Admissions officers at top 25 schools, they know what other questions are being posed by other programs. And if you're trying to make an essay something that it's not, it can raise questions in the admissions office about why their particular school is not a priority, why you're using another school's essay for theirs. And you also need to think about your essays as a package. They're not single essays. They need to be taken together because they're read and evaluated together. So think about how they're going to tell together a compelling and supporting story to your application. You want to be direct, you want to be to the point, and you want to be engaging. First, be direct. Your space is limited. If you have 250 words, if you have 500 words, that's not a lot of room to put together a compelling piece of writing. You're not going to be able to tell your entire life story. You need to prioritize. This is really an exercise in your ability to identify examples that are most impactful. I want to come back to something that we talked about earlier, which is what always needs to be in the back of your mind. Why do you want an MBA? What will you bring to the table? And how will business school plus your past experience help you achieve your goals? That second bullet is probably, if you take away only one thing from this webinar today, I hope that you'll remember this, because those are really the key pieces to successful MBA admissions essays, is being able to articulate why you want an MBA, how you're different and what you will bring to the table, and how business school plus your past experience is going to help you achieve your short-term and your long-term career goals. You want to get to the point with your writing. Don't spend half your essay explaining a situation. You want to talk about the effect of that situation on you. Talk about how it changed you. Talk about what you learned. You see a pattern here. The essays are about you. So make sure that you focus on you during these essays. Don't use examples that are found in other parts of your application. If the first bullet on your resume is about a project that you took on that, I don't know, reduced waste at your company by 25%, don't use that same example as an accomplishment example in an essay. Try to get the most mileage out of these essays. Unless your example is particularly impressive, if it's something that really just warrants more attention and you want to emphasize it in your letters of recommendation, if you want to emphasize it in your interview, in your resume, in your essays, that's fine. It's not something that I would necessarily advise, but if you are particularly, if you feel like that accomplishment warrants that type of attention, then do it. I would argue that you should not be redundant. You want to give admissions officers a complete picture of who you are. And talking about an example that you've talked about in other parts of your application, I think, is a wasted opportunity. Finally, be engaging. This is, of course, a professional exercise in writing, but that doesn't mean it needs to be boring. You want to add some life to your essays. Again, put yourself in the shoes of an admissions officer who is sitting at his or her desk reviewing literally hundreds, if not thousands, of these essays. It can get a little bit repetitive and it can get a little bit boring. Start with an engaging opening line. Get the reader hooked. Make them want to read your essay. You want to use quotations. You want to add parenthetical comments. You want to use descriptive terms. Make these essays something that are actually fun to read. And if you can do that and you can engage admissions officers in a way that other applicants can't, it's really going to help you stand out in this process. Let's talk about creativity, and let's talk a little bit more about appropriate examples for you to draw on with your essays. You do have leeway to be creative, but I would caution you to only be creative if there's a real purpose behind it. Now, there are some programs that have essay prompts that specifically ask you to be creative. If you're being asked to be creative, then by all means, be creative. Now, if essays are not specifically asking you to be creative, try to think slightly outside of the box. I think more so with your story and the examples and less so with the structure of your essays. You don't want to have poetry. You don't want to have a song. I mean, you want it to be professional, but you can think about what are some really interesting, engaging examples that I can talk about that perhaps others cannot. Have you traveled somewhere? Have you had some really interesting work experience? Do you have a really unique hobby? What makes you different? Can you tie that type of personal interest into your professional interests? Be fresh with your writing. This is not a business brief. You need to be professional, but I would encourage you to be creative when it's appropriate. And then finally, use real and vivid examples. Examples are critical to your essays. You're not going to spend your essays talking about the examples in full. You're going to spend most of your essay talking about the impact that that type of experience has had on you. But still, examples help admissions officers understand the real impact of your accomplishments, I think, in a more concrete way. Admissions officers are also looking to identify future potential. Is this someone who, based on previous experience, will excel in the future? You want to be authentic in your examples. As I mentioned earlier, you want to be likable. Think about admissions officers as human beings, and you want to make a connection with them. And if you can make a real connection with them, I would argue that you're much more likely to get admitted to these schools. Finally, you want to proofread, you want to iterate, and you want to polish your essays. Your first draft, it goes without saying, should never be your final draft. You want to get objective feedback from an unbiased reader. You want to ask, do I come across as likable? Do I come across as compelling? Do I answer the question? Do I come across as someone who would contribute to this business school program? Of course, your feedback can be focused on grammar and spelling, but really it's about content. Spelling errors or mistakes, grammatical mistakes in your essays are not an automatic ding. You want to proofread these and eliminate them, but if one slips by, it's not going to mean that you're rejected from a business school. But they do reflect on your attention to detail. So make sure that you spend time going through these essays and polishing them as best you can. I would encourage you to read the essays out loud. Does this sound like you? If it does, then you've been successful in putting together an essay that will resonate in a real way. If the essays don't sound like you, go back to the drawing board and keep working on them until you can put together an essay that does sound like you. Finally, I would encourage you not to over-edit. You can spend days, weeks, months editing these essays. Now with each iteration, with each edit, I feel like a bit more of your voice is lost. And a voice in an essay is critical. It's about building a connection, some of these things that we've already discussed. These essays need to be about you. Edit them 2 times, edit them 3 times, and then be done with it. Because if you over-edit, you really can start to push your essay from something that's authentic and real to something that's inauthentic and fake. And if it's inauthentic and fake, it's certainly not going to help you in this process. We've started with an overview. We talked about getting organized. We talked about self-discovery. We talked about putting pen to paper. And I want to wrap up today with some tips from our counselors on strong topics, how to stand out, and ultimately how you can improve your chances of getting admitted to these schools with top-notch essays. There's 3 that I really would like to focus on. There could be 8 more slides of just tips and tips and tips and tips, and I really want to boil down 3 key tips so that you can take away from this webinar something that's tangible and something that's real and something that can help you and benefit you in this process. The first is to dedicate time to the essays. As I've mentioned earlier, they are critical. They can move you from being a qualified applicant to an admitted applicant. GMAT scores, your undergraduate GPA, these allow you to pass a certain hurdle in the admissions process. But ultimately, it's the essays and it's the other more qualitative pieces of your application, like your letters of recommendation and your resume and your interview, that will tip the scale in your favor. Most applicants are qualified to attend these schools, but far fewer are admitted. And I think that the essays are a real way for you to move from a qualified applicant to an admitted applicant. With that said, you don't want to go overboard. I talked earlier about not over-editing your essay, and I want you to put your essays into perspective. The MBA admissions process is holistic. And what that means is that admissions officers are looking at the entire package. They're looking, yes, at your academic qualifications. Yes, they're looking at the essay. Yes, they're looking at your career interests and the diversity and many other factors. So the essays are just one piece. The essays can make up for deficiencies in other parts of your application, though. So keep that in mind, especially with the optional essay. And you want to dedicate the time that these essays deserve. You want to be careful with your topics, and you want to avoid buzzwords. Avoid risky topics. Why take the chance? You don't want to talk about religion. You don't want to talk about politics. Don't bring things in that admissions readers can feel opinionated about. What if your opinion is different than their opinion? Then they start to evaluate your application and your essay not just on the quality of your writing, but on other factors. Keep risky topics, when possible, out of the equation. Focus on those topics that give admissions officers insight into who you are. Please don't use buzzwords. When I spoke to our team of former admissions officers, they said they literally could slap their head every time they read synergy or value add. Get it out. It's something that is inauthentic. It's not real. It comes across as applicants trying to write essays that they think admissions officers want to read, as opposed to writing essays that they feel are representative of who they are. The last tip is really threefold, and it's something that we've touched on at the beginning, in the middle, and throughout this presentation. With writing all of your essays, always keep in mind, how are you different? What will you be able to bring to the table that other applicants will not? And you want to highlight those differentiators. We talked earlier about 3 to 5 differentiators, trying to align your differentiators with the types of qualities that business schools are looking to identify in applicants. Second, how will your past experience plus an MBA help you achieve your goals? When you're establishing your short-term and your long-term goals, think about, does it make sense based on my past experience and based on the resources and the support that will be available to me in business school? Finally, and this ties into that first point, what niche or role will you fill? Once you figure that out, build your story and your essays around that. You'll be more compelling, you'll be more likable, and ultimately we believe it will improve your chances of getting admitted to these schools. So with that, I just want to wrap up. We talked today about an overview more generally of MBA admissions essays. We've talked about getting organized and figuring out how to tackle these essays. We talked about a critical step of self-discovery, figuring out why you are interested, reflecting on what makes you different. We've talked about putting a pen to paper, engaging your readers, keeping it brief to the point, using strong examples. And then we wrapped up with some 3 final tips from our team of former MBA admissions officers on how you can stand out in this process. So with that, I want to take a little bit of time now to answer some of your questions that have come in over the course of this webinar today.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Mark, is what I meant to say, for that wonderful presentation. For those of you who might have been joining us a little bit into Mark's session today, we've been hearing Marc Zawel, co-founder of AcceptU, talk about how to write effective application essays, a step-by-step guide. So at this point, we are open to taking your questions. I think we got about 10 minutes, maybe 11 minutes to take your questions live. And why don't we just jump right into it. So, Mark, I see the first question is from Zoe. Any suggestions on video essays to differentiate oneself from the application pool?
I think that video essays are your opportunity to form an even more direct connection with admissions officers, because admissions officers are sitting at a desk, they're reading applications and they're reading essays. Now, video adds another component because it's much more real. Now, you have to be real in the essays and in the video essays. you don't want these to be professionally produced. It's going to come across as inauthentic and not real. But you also want to be as polished as you can be. So for the video essays, I would recommend putting together a script, but trying to make it as casual as possible. And try to build off of the emotional connection that you might be able to establish with an admissions officer who is sitting there watching a video as opposed to simply sitting there and reading an essay.
Great. And I think I've noticed that over the last year or two, these are becoming more and more common across applications. Is that the case?
I think that what admissions officers and what business schools are trying to do is figure out the best way of identifying applicants. So the essays have always been critically important, but with the increasing use of these video essays, it's about admissions officers trying to build an even stronger connection with those applicants that they intend on admitting. So I think that looking ahead, they will certainly be continued to be looked upon and probably increasingly used by admissions officers as a means of trying to build a connection with applicants that they feel are the right fit for their programs.
All right. Why don't we move on to another question here? And I see one from M. Siddharth asking, is it okay to use the same example in a long-term and a short-term goal essay?
The way that I would approach the goal essay or the why MBA essay is think about first your short-term goal. Your short-term goal should be reflective of your past experience. Now, I know that most MBA applicants are going to business school or looking to go to business school in order to change careers. But I still think it's important that in your either professional or in your personal experience, you can draw on some of that to explain to admissions officers why you are interested in what you say that you are interested in today, and how business school is going to be the bridge that gets you from where you are today to where you want to go in the future. So think about an example that shows them that you've given real thought and you've put real time into understanding why you are interested in achieving this short-term goal. Now, in terms of your long-term goal, the example should be thinking about what you are going to be able to achieve in your short-term goal. So your short-term goal is about your past experience plus business school. Your long-term goal is business school plus your short-term goal. So think about drawing from examples with your short-term goal on your past experience. Your long-term goal examples are a little bit more difficult because they're all hypothetical. You're talking about what you would be able to achieve in your short-term goal and how you would be able to leverage that to achieve your long-term goal.
David has a question for you, Mark. It says, any advice on those tricky 140-character tweet essays, quote unquote?
They're really not that important. We work with many clients that are targeting schools that have introduced these tweet essays, and what we tell them is, put some time and thought into thinking about what this essay or what this short essay will do for you, but you're really not going to be able to get very much across in 140 characters. They're really not that important, but if you can put together something that's fun and interesting and a little bit different, then it can help you stand out. What I would say with the tweets or the 140 character essays is try to connect, meaning talk in the language of Twitter. If you're not familiar with Twitter, if you're not familiar with hashtags and ats, then get familiar with them before you sit down to put together your tweet. And think about how are you going to incorporate the language of Twitter into this essay. Because if you don't incorporate the language of Twitter, it's not really a tweet. It's really just a 140-character essay. So get familiar with what the language of Twitter is. Try to incorporate that so that you show at least an understanding of how Twitter and tweets work, and build a 140-character essay that hopefully can help you stand out, but recognize also that they're really not that important.
So I want to follow up on that a little bit, Mark. So you mentioned that they aren't that important, and I tend to agree with you on that perspective. But What do you think the schools are trying to accomplish in asking 140 character response?
Well, more generally, what we're seeing with MBA application essays is a shift away from 1,000+ word manifestos on why you want to go to business school. What the tweets are doing, what 250-word short answers are doing, is forcing applicants to boil down exactly why they want to go to business school, what they're going to be able to bring to the table, why that business school is going to help them achieve their goals. So it's forcing applicants that in the past have been very wishy-washy or theoretical about why they want to go to business school and saying, you have to tell us why you want to go to business school in 140 characters or in 250 words. And I think that we'll continue to see this shift over time, moving from longer essays that are 750 or 1,000+ word essays to much shorter essays, because schools are trying to boil down the essence of what each applicant is, and the best way for them to do so is by forcing applicants to answer in shorter responses.
All right, let's move on to a formatting question from Saurabh. Saurabh is asking, is it fine to use italics or bold font to highlight certain points in your essays? Thoughts on that?
I would say yes, but sparingly. Bold or italics or all capital letters can certainly convey a point. I think italics, for example, you could use italics as a way to indicate that these are thoughts as opposed to actions. So you can use italics in a way that make it a little bit more dynamic to read. Bold obviously would be used to emphasize something. I don't really see bold used in application essays, so I don't necessarily know. It would depend on the situation that you are trying to convey. But I would really try to use them sparingly. The more that you do use them, the less impact they're going to have.
That's right. And I think there are some applications, though, where it's almost an online form field, right, where you have to copy and paste text fields. I don't know if that's as common today as it was when I applied to business school, but maybe, Saurabh, you have to be mindful of those situations, too. Okay. Well, let's see. We have time for a few more questions here. Thiago has a question about reapplication. Can I use the same essay for reapplication?
In some cases, you will have to. You have to look at it on a school-by-school basis. Some business schools with the reapplication will ask for all new essays. Some business schools will ask you to write 1 or 2 new essays while keeping 1 or 2 of your existing essays. Some of them will ask you only to submit a statement updating the admissions office on what has changed. And I think that last point, regardless of whether you're rewriting all of your essays, rewriting some of your essays, or only writing an update to your existing essays, that is the point that you need to drive home. What has changed between when you last applied and where you are today? You have to go and give yourself an honest assessment of why you were not admitted to these schools in the first place. Was your academic performance not where it needed to be? Did you not have enough work experience? Did you not properly position your application? What are the reasons why you were not admitted? Then in your application essay, talking about why you are reapplying, show that you have made progress in addressing the deficiencies that prevented you from being admitted to the school initially. That's really the goal of the reapplicant essays, whether you're rewriting all of them or you're rewriting some of them or just writing one. Emphasize that point. What has changed between when you last applied and when you're applying today, and ultimately why does that make you a stronger applicant today than when you last applied?
All right, and I think this next question will be our last one for today, Mark, and it's coming from Kimmy. Kimmy's asking, any advice on the quote-unquote introduce yourself essays? Schools like NYU require this, where creativity is encouraged. Should I talk about myself professionally or personally?
I think both. and this ties back into much of what we talked about today, give admissions officers insight into why you are different. Now, there can be many things about you that make you different. Maybe your personal upbringing was a little bit different. Maybe you live in an area that is a little bit different. Maybe your career has been a little bit different. Maybe your post-MBA plans are a little bit different. What is it about you that makes you different, whether it's personal, professional, whether it's a hobby, an interest, whether it's your diversity? Think seriously about what makes you different. Ultimately, admissions officers don't care with these introduction essays if it's personal or if it's professional. You certainly want to include some of both, but don't limit yourself to just professional. Give admissions officers insight into some of your personal differentiators as well. And if you can introduce them to you as an applicant that is different, an applicant that's going to be able to bring something to the business school that other applicants won't, then I think that that's a very effective means of standing out and ultimately improving your chances of getting admitted to these schools.
And with that, I think we're going to have to wrap up today's session, Mark. So to audience members who may join us late, we've been listening to Marc Zawel, who is the co-founder and CEO of AcceptU, break down the key steps on effectively writing application essays so you can present your best side to business schools. So a couple of notes before we conclude today. If you're interested in working with AcceptU and receiving a complimentary admissions assessment, there's a link right on the screen right here for learnmore.acceptu.com/webinar. And additionally, the folks at AcceptU are kind enough to provide a full copy of this presentation. Here's a link, learnmore.acceptu.com/essay. If your writing hand is tired or you couldn't reach for a pen fast enough, we will be sending a follow-up email with this information, so no worries about that. But again, Mark, thank you so much for this great presentation today and for coming out to speak with the Beat the GMAT community.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and to our audience members, a big thank you as well. And hopefully you got a lot of great tips from Mark and the team at AcceptU. And we wish you well this admission season. Hope to see you at a future webinar. All the best.